stunned silence. Their faces assumed the awful craftiness of children listening for sounds from the grown-up world. All was as still as salt. Then everything was right. No, stop. Everything was wrong. Nana, who had been barking distressfully all evening, was quiet now. It was her silence they had heard. "Out with the light. Hide, quick," cried John, taking command for the only time throughout the whole adventure. And thus, when Liza entered, holding Nana, the nursery seemed quite its old self, very dark, and you could have sworn you heard its 3 wicked inmates breathing angelically as they slept. They were really doing it artfully from behind the window curtains. Liza was in a bad temper, for she was mixing the Christmas puddings in the kitchen and had been drawn from them with a raisin still on her cheek. By Nana's absurd suspicions, she thought the best way of getting a little quiet was to take Nana to the nursery for a moment, but in custody, of course. "There, you suspicious brute," she said, not sorry that Nana was in disgrace. "They are perfectly safe, aren't they? Every one of the little angels, asleep, sound in bed. Little angels sound asleep in bed. Listen to their gentle breathing." Here Michael, encouraged by his success, breathed so loudly that they were nearly detected. Nana knew that kind of breathing, and she tried to drag herself out of Liza's clutches. But Liza was dense. "No more of it, Nana," she said sternly, pulling her out of the room. "I warn you, if you bark again, I shall go straight for Master and Mrs. and bring them home from the party, and then, oh, won't Master whip you, just." She tied the unhappy dog back up. "But do you think Nana ceased to bark? Bring Master and Mrs. home from the party? Why, that was just what she wanted. Do you think she cared whether she whipped so long as her charges were safe?" Unfortunately, Liza returned to her puddings, and Nana, seeing that no help would come for her, strained and strained at the chain until at last she broke it. In another moment, she had burst into the dining room of 27 and flung up her paws to heaven, her most expressive way of making communication. Mr. and Mrs. Darling knew at once something terrible was happening in the nursery, and without a goodbye to their hostess, they rushed into the street. But it was now 10 minutes since 3 scoundrels had been breathing behind the curtains, and Peter Pan can do a great deal in 10 minutes. We now returned to the nursery. "It's all right," John announced, emerging from his hiding place. "I say, Peter, can you really fly?" Instead of troubling to answer him, Peter flew around the room, taking the mantelpiece on the way. "How topping," said John to Michael. "How sweet," cried Wendy. "Yes, I'm sweet." "Oh, I am sweet," said Peter, forgetting his manners again. It looked delightfully easily, and they tried it first from the floor and then from the beds, but they always went down instead of up. "I say, how do you do it?" asked John, rubbing his knee. He was quite a practical boy. "You just think lovely, wonderful thoughts," Peter explained, "and they lift you up into the air." He showed them again. "You're so nippy at it," John said. "Can't you do it very slowly once?" Peter did it both slowly and quickly. "I've got it now, Wendy," cried John. But soon he found that he had not. Not one of them could fly an inch, though even Michael was in words of 2 syllables, and Peter did not know A from Z. Of course, Peter had been trifling with them, for no one can fly unless fairy dust has been blown on them. Fortunately, as we have mentioned, one of his hands was messy with it, and he blew some at each of them, and with the most superb results. "Now just wiggle your shoulders this way," he said, "and let go." They were all in their beds, and gallant Michael let go first. He did not mean to let go, but he did, and immediately it was borne across the room. "I flewed," he screamed, while still in midair. John let go and met Wendy near the bathroom. "Oh, lovely. Oh, ripping. Look at me, look at me, look at me." They were not nearly so elegant as Peter. They could not help kicking a little, but their heads were bobbing against the ceiling, and there's almost nothing so delicious as that. Peter gave Wendy a hand at first, but had to desist. Tink was so indignant. Up and down they went, and round, heavenly was Wendy's word. "I say," cried John, "why shouldn't we all go out?" Of course, it was to this that Peter had been luring them. Michael was ready. He wanted to see how long it took him to do 1,000,000,000 miles. But Wendy hesitated. "Mermaids," said Peter again. "Oh, and there are pirates." "Pirates," cried John, seizing his Sunday hat. "Let us go at once." It was just at this moment that Mr. and Mrs. Darling hurried with Nana out of 27. They ran into the middle of the street to look up at the nursery window, and yes, it was still shut. But the room was ablaze with light, and the most heart-gripping sight of all, they could see in a shadow of the curtain 3 little figures in the night attire, circling round and round, not on the floor, but in the air. Not 3 figures, 4. In a tremble, they opened the street door. Mr. Darling would have rushed upstairs, but Mrs. Darling signed him to go softly. She even tried to make her heart go softly. Will they reach the nursery in time? If so, how delightful for them, and we shall all breathe a sigh of relief. But there will be no story, on the other hand, if they are not in time. I solemnly promise that will all come right to an end. They would have reached the nursery in time had it not been that the little stars were watching them. Once again the stars blew the window open, and that smallest star of all called out, "Cave, Peter." Then Peter knew that there was not a moment to lose. "Come," he cried imperiously, and soared out the window into the night, followed by John and Michael and Wendy. Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana rushed into the nursery too late. The birds were flown.